Welcome to Plot, Fiction and Gunpowder. You're Nell, I'm Scott.
Gunpowder, fiction and plot. I just don't appreciate that sort of nonsense.
That fuckwittery.
Okay, so today we're going to do a new type of video. And we're going to make lots of these, so be prepared.
Episode 1 of 172.
Yeah, potentially. Is that the actual number, 172?
I don't know.
So we're going to do one of these for every country until we run out of countries or get bored.
Plus some of the countries that don't exist.
Yes, the unrecognized nations. Yeah.
Like the Kurds and the Narnians.
Narnians? Is it real?
Is it real?
Yeah.
Yeah, they have a big lion as their king.
Oh, you're a butt. Okay. We have a personal challenge, both of us, to read one book from every country. And
it's a long-term challenge.
Yeah, we're not doing that by the end of this year. That's a long-term challenge. And as we sort of work our way around the world, I guess, you do a bit of research into what books exist that are by authors from each country. You sort of decide...
How are you going to read an Uzbek book if you don't know about any Uzbek books?
Exactly. So as we do this research for countries, we thought we might sort of share our journey around the globe. We do this because we read around the globe for like representation and fictional internal travel, I guess.
As like white English speaking Westerners, we just tend to, if we're left to our own devices and don't challenge things, read books from the UK, the US and Canada, really. Like, maybe we'll venture out into France and Russia, but that's basically it.
Some stuff from Australia.
Oh, we might actually read stuff from here.
Probably not.
But not often, right?
Let's be fair.
I mean, let's not muddy the pot.
We've decided that we're going to make a video per country and recommend some books by authors from that country. When we choose which books to recommend, we take a few things into account. We haven't read all of these books, I just want to say. A lot of them
are not that well read.
No, a lot of them are on our TBR as part of our, personal challenge to read around the world. Some of them we will have read, and we will say which those are when we get to them. But I try and pick from books from Indigenous peoples where the country has been colonised. Sometimes that is a much more complex equation than others, as you'll see with our first country. Yeah. I try to pick from people who... I try to pick at least some books that are set within that country. Because I guess if you're trying to get a picture of their culture and their flavour, them writing about other people's culture doesn't necessarily fit that bill. There might be instances where I break any of these rules, but this is sort of the guideline, I guess. I try and pick books also. I try and get at least one like classic from their sort of classic literature. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. Yeah, and if there have been like major events in their history that impact their literature, I try and sort of, we talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, we can talk about what major events affect each country when we're affecting each country. We're going to do one country per video, and considering that May is the month for Asian Readathon, we thought that we'd start with one of the biggest countries. In fact, it is the biggest country in Asia,
by
Russia.
Landmass?
No. Russia is actually the biggest country in Asia by landmass. Oh. It is the second biggest country in Asia by landmass.
And that is China. So we're starting with China. The first book on our China list, Scott's actually read.
Yeah, China has 4 books that they consider their absolute classics, and one of them is Journey to the West. Now, when you limit the whole of Chinese literature to 4 books, I was sort of expecting a serious book, but I got a book about a monkey pissing on people.
I love it.
This is, if anybody watched that show, it was when we were kids, so most BookTube's probably too young, but Monkey Magic, do you remember Monkey?
No. I did not watch this.
You did not watch it. This is based on Journey to the West. It was like a dubbed into English and sent over here kids version of Monkey. Anyway, it tells the story of the Monkey King who defied the gods and basically hit them all with cudgels and then got imprisoned. And then he broke free and he promised to be a very good monkey, and he got a band of followers, and he had troubles with understanding what a very good monkey was. And it is basically an action comedy a la, like it's like such a popular genre now where you've got like this all action comedy, fantasy comedy thing. Except this book is 500 years old.
It sounds really good. Was it enjoyable to read?
It was enjoyable to read.
Well, I think that's a really good sign for a classic, to be honest.
With this book, if you are reading it in English, you'll have to look at who's translating it and what treatment it has gotten and how much it's been abridged. But that happens with, pardon me,
a lot of the books that we talk about in this project will be translations. So
yeah, and you'll have to to think the translator doesn't have an influence over the quality of a book is silly.
Yeah. So my first one is Red Sorghum by Mo Yan. Mo Yan's actually a Nobel Prize winner for literature. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing their name right. But this is a multi-generational family saga set mostly in like the 1930s. So we're talking sort of the very start of the conflict of the Chinese Revolution. There's Japan invades. There's lots of like Chinese history embedded in this family saga set in beautiful Chinese countryside. It's considered a classic amongst the Chinese, and it is very, very highly recommended. I've not read this one, but it is quite high on my list as far as understanding the China that allowed modern China to come to be.
Right. The next book we want to talk about is The Three-Body Problem by Liu Shixin. That is not how you pronounce.
We'll write it on the screen.
Cixin? I don't know.
It's an X is a sh sound.
Cixin.
Cixin?
Cixin? Liu Cixin? I don't know. The Three-Body Problem is a sci-fi book. Sci-fi, as you just mentioned, is very important in Chinese literature for a lot of...
So, if you know the history of the Chinese Revolution, once Mao took over, they had what they called the Cultural Revolution, which basically banned a lot of art, literature, academia from happening. There wasn't communist propaganda or pro-Mao, like really specifically perpetuating an image of China that they wanted to perpetuate. So a lot of things became outlawed. In the sort of 70s, there was a bit of a sci-fi movement that was a bit underground and subversive, but they actually made science fiction literature specifically illegal. They called it something that sounds really sexual, spiritual dirtiness or something. I can't remember the exact expression, but they outlawed it, and it didn't come back again until the 90s. There was like 20 years where they weren't allowed to do it at all, like specifically science fiction at all. So it's quite a subversive art form in China, and important.
Yeah, so, but it definitely will have had the effect to make it much more popular in society when they legalised it. Like, can you imagine how drunk you would get if alcohol was illegal by death and then they brought it back. And then they brought it back after 20 years.
Yeah. It's also like a genre that lends itself to sneaky criticism, and I think you've got to be sneaky with your criticism in China. It does.
Anyway, The Three-Body Problem tells a story of aliens coming to Earth and visiting it and potentially taking over it, and then two factions on Earth, one that is pro the aliens taking over the Earth, which is obviously it's the political thing here that they want the aliens to replace their evil overlords, their rulers, and then one that doesn't, and then it goes from there.
Yeah, that's high on my list. I really want to read that one.
Sounds quite interesting, doesn't it?
There's a lot of, when we were doing the research for this video, there's a lot of like Chinese science fiction that is more difficult to find, that all sounds like really, like if you're a sci-fi reader, I think that that's a subgenre that is worth investigating.
And we should say that if you are watching this from China, that these books don't exist and they're all imaginary.
If you've read any of them,
unless you own a VPN.
if you've read any of these books, as always, we'd really like you to get down in the comments and tell us what you think. But the last book on our list is called Chronicles of a Blood Merchant. This is from a category of Chinese literature that they call scar literature. It's basically a whole subsection of literature that is natives of China discussing the atrocities that have occurred over the last few decades. Chronicles of a Blood Merchant is about a man who sells his blood to make ends meet, and at one point in the Cultural Revolution he is so struggling to make ends meet that he nearly dies from selling so much of his blood. And that's sort of the framework for the story. And then there's a personal drama on top of that. So
that sounds amazing.
It sounds like a really amazing read. There was so many really amazing titles. To narrow it down to this one, you had to like sell your blood to be the winner. But that's so interesting to me.
That's and scar literature just sounds like a genre that I want to read.
Yeah, it also sounds like a deep pit of humanity. But there's a lot. There's when you're talking about a country that had the one-child policy, and you had like then you've got an imbalance of genders and the Cultural Revolution, and Chinese history, recent history is really volatile and produces, I guess, great art.
It's what usually happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Art doesn't exist without suffering. Alright, that's it. That's the first one in our series of Reading Around the World.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you are into the next one. If you have a country that you'd like us to cover next,
we won't do it because we've already decided what we're doing next. But third, we got progress.
Yeah, so mention it in the comments and let us know what you think of the books we've listed.
Bye.